It was just another ordinary Tuesday for Charles Westbrook, an 82-year-old millionaire who had made his fortune in real estate. His weathered hands gripped his walking cane as he strolled through Jefferson Park, where he often came to clear his mind and escape the emptiness of his mansion. The autumn leaves crunched beneath his expensive leather shoes, and the cool breeze carried the laughter of children playing nearby. Charles hadn't smiled genuinely in years, not since his wife Margaret passed away 5 years ago, leaving him with nothing but money and memories. As he approached his usual bench, something caught his eye. A small girl, no older than 7, sitting alone on the grass with a sketch pad. She was drawing with such intense focus that she didn't notice the old man watching her from a distance. What Charles saw next made his heart stop. The little girl's pencil moved confidently across the paper, creating the unmistakable outline of a Victorian-style house with a distinctive wraparound porch and a peculiar weather vane shaped like a rooster. It wasn't just any house. It was his childhood home, the one he hadn't seen in over 70 years, the one that had been demolished decades ago. His legs trembled as he moved closer, wondering if his old eyes were playing tricks on him. The details were perfect. The uneven third step on the porch, the bay window where his mother used to sit and read, even the old oak tree that had stood sentinel beside the house for generations. How could this child possibly know about a house that no longer existed? Charles felt a chill run down his spine as he approached the girl, who was humming softly to herself, completely absorbed in her artwork. If you're enjoying this incredible story so far, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales that will touch your soul. Leave a comment telling us if you believe in fate bringing people together, just like what might be happening between Charles and this mysterious girl. Your support helps us continue sharing these emotional journeys that remind us how connected our lives truly are. "Excuse me, young lady," Charles said, his voice slightly shaky. "That's a beautiful drawing you're making there." The girl looked up, revealing bright hazel eyes that seemed oddly familiar to Charles, though he couldn't place why. She smiled shyly, but didn't seem alarmed by the stranger's presence. "Thank you, sir," she replied politely. "It's my dream house. I see it in my dreams almost every night." Charles carefully lowered himself onto the grass beside her, his joints protesting after decades of wear. He pointed to the drawing with his trembling finger. "May I ask where you've seen this house?" The girl's eyes lit up with excitement. "I told you, in my dreams. My mom says I have a big imagination, but this house feels real to me. I know every room inside, too." Charles felt goosebumps rising on his arms as the girl continued describing details that only someone who had lived in that house could possibly know. "My name is Charles," he introduced himself, trying to keep his voice steady despite the storm of emotions brewing inside. "What's your name, young artist?" The girl tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear, the same shade his sister had worn long ago. "I'm Isabella, but everyone calls me Isa," she replied, extending her small hand with surprising formality. Charles shook it gently, noticing a small birthmark on her wrist, shaped like a crescent moon. His breath caught in his throat. His mother had had the exact same mark. "Isa, would you mind showing me more of your drawings?" he asked, his mind racing with possibilities that seemed impossible, yet somehow inevitable. She nodded eagerly and flipped through her sketchbook, revealing more images that sent shockwaves through Charles's system. The old barn behind his childhood home, the stream where he used to catch frogs, and most surprisingly, a family portrait of people she couldn't possibly have known, his family, from over 70 years ago. "Where's your mother, Isa?" Charles asked, looking around the park. His heart was pounding so hard he feared it might give out right there. The coincidences were too perfect, too precise to be mere chance. Isa pointed toward a young woman sitting on a bench about 50 yards away, reading a book and occasionally glancing up to check on her daughter. "That's my mom, Claire. She brings me here every Tuesday and Thursday after school," Isa explained, as she continued adding details to her drawing. Charles studied the woman from afar. She looked to be in her early 30s with the same auburn hair as her daughter. He needed to speak with her, but what would he say? "Hello, your daughter is drawing my childhood home that was destroyed. Before you were born." It sounded crazy even in his head, but he knew he had to try. "Would you introduce me to your mother, Isa? I'd like to tell her what a talented artist you are." As they walked toward Claire, Charles noticed the woman's posture, stiffened slightly at the sight of her daughter approaching hand in hand with an elderly stranger. Any good mother would be cautious, he thought approvingly. "Mom, this is Mr. Charles. He likes my drawings of the dream house," Isa announced proudly as they reached the bench. Claire stood up, her expression a careful mixture of politeness and protective concern. "Hello, I'm Claire Thompson," she said with a tentative smile, extending her hand. When Charles introduced himself as Charles Westbrook, he noticed a flicker of recognition in her eyes, quickly masked. "Westbrook? As in Westbrook Properties?" she asked, referring to his real estate empire. Charles nodded, but he was more interested in her reaction to the name itself rather than his business. There was something in her manner that suggested she knew more than she was letting on, and Charles felt a strange, tingling sensation at the base of his neck, the same feeling he used to get when he was close to closing an important business deal. "Your daughter has quite a remarkable talent," Charles began, choosing his words carefully. "She's drawing a house that I'm very familiar with." Claire's smile faltered for just a moment before she composed herself. "Yes, she's been drawing that same house for years now. Quite the imagination," she replied. But there was a forced quality to her light-heartedness. Charles hesitated, then decided to take a risk. "Mrs. Thompson, this may sound strange, but the house your daughter is drawing was my childhood home in Millfield, Connecticut, a home that was torn down in 1965. Claire's face paled visibly, and she grabbed the bench for support. That's impossible," she whispered, but her eyes told a different story. Isa looked between the adults, confused by their serious expressions. "Mom? Is something wrong?" Claire quickly recovered and forced a smile. "No, sweetie." "Why? Don't you go play on the swings for a few minutes while I talk to Mr. Westbrook?" As Isa reluctantly walked away, Claire turned to Charles with tears forming in her eyes. "How did you know about Millfield?" "I grew up there," Charles said simply, lowering himself onto the bench beside Claire. "That house Isa is drawing was built by my grandfather in 1897. I lived there until I was 12, when my family lost everything in the market crash and we had to sell it." Claire's hands trembled as she reached into her purse and pulled out a worn photograph, handling it with the care one might give to a precious relic. "My grandmother gave me this before she died," she said, passing it to Charles. The photograph showed the exact same house, with a family standing proudly on the front porch. Charles felt dizzy as he recognized himself as a young boy, standing next to his parents and sister. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, his voice barely audible. Claire took a deep breath, as if gathering courage for what she was about to say. "My grandmother's name was Elizabeth Westbrook before she married. She was your sister, Charles. I'm your grandniece." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Charles stared at the woman before him, searching her features for traces of his beloved sister. "Elizabeth?" Charles whispered, the name feeling like a prayer on his lips. "Little Lizzie?" He hadn't spoken his sister's name aloud in decades. After their family lost the house, they had scattered to the winds. His parents died young, broken by financial ruin, and he had lost touch with his sister despite his efforts. To find her once he became successful. Claire nodded, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "She tried to find you many times. She had newspaper clippings of your success, followed your career from afar. She was so proud of what you accomplished. But she—" Claire hesitated, pain evident in her expression. "She thought you wouldn't want to reconnect with a reminder of the past you'd worked so hard to overcome. She was living on welfare when she had my father, barely making ends meet. She didn't want to appear like she was after your money. Charles felt a hot tear slide down his weathered cheek, the first he had shed since Margaret's funeral. All these years, he had believed himself completely alone in the world, the last of his family line, when his sister had been alive. Thinking of him, proud of him from afar. "And Isa?" Charles asked, looking over at the little girl who was now swinging, her legs pumping enthusiastically as she reached for the sky. "How does she know about the house? That photograph doesn't show the inside details she's drawn." Claire wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and gave a small, mystified smile. "That's what I can't explain. She started drawing it when she was 4, describing rooms she couldn't possibly have seen. She talks about a hidden compartment behind the fireplace brick where someone kept treasures." Charles felt the blood drain from his face. He had indeed hidden his most precious possessions, a baseball card, a smooth riverstone, and a small toy soldier, in a loose brick in the fireplace. No one had known about it, not even Lizzie. "I thought she had an imaginary friend or an overactive imagination," Claire continued. "But the details, they were so specific. She would talk about sitting in a window seat, watching the snow fall while someone played piano in the parlor." Charles could barely breathe. His mother had played the piano every Sunday afternoon while he sat in that very window seat. It was as if Isa had his memories. "There's something else you should know," Claire said, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper. "My grandmother, your sister, she passed away 3 months before Isa was born." She let the implication hang in the air between them. Charles wasn't a superstitious man. He had built his empire on concrete facts and strategic planning, not flights of fancy. Yet he couldn't deny the evidence before him. This child somehow carried memories that could only have come from his childhood home. Whether through some cosmic connection or simply an unexplainable phenomenon, his sister's great-granddaughter had formed a bridge across time and family separation. "Does Isa know anything about me or her great-grandmother?" Charles asked, watching the little girl who had inexplicably brought his past back to life. Claire shook her head. "I've told her stories about our family, but nothing specific about the house or you. I didn't know what you looked like until today. The Westbrook name is common enough that I never made the connection to Westbrook properties." For the first time in decades, Charles felt a spark of something he had long forgotten: hope. He had spent his life accumulating wealth, building an empire that he would leave to no one, filling the emptiness inside him with acquisitions rather than connections. Now, sitting on this park bench on an ordinary Tuesday, he had discovered what had been missing all along. "Claire," he said, his voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "Would you and Isa join me for lunch? I'd like to hear everything about Elizabeth, about your family, about our family." He emphasized the last 2 words, testing how they felt in his mouth. They felt right, like coming home after a long journey. Claire studied him for a moment, perhaps assessing his sincerity before nodding. "Isa would love that. She has a way of knowing people, seeing into them somehow. She's been asking me to bring her to this park for weeks now, insisting that something important would happen here." As they called Isa over from the swings, Charles watched her run toward them with the boundless energy of childhood. Her sketchbook was clutched tightly to her chest, full of drawings that had somehow preserved his past when all physical traces had long since vanished. When she reached them, she looked up at Charles with those wise old eyes in her young face and said something that shook him to his core. "I knew we would find you, Uncle Charles. Great-Grandma Lizzie said we would." Claire gasped softly beside him. "Isa, honey, we've never talked about a Great-Grandma Lizzie or Uncle Charles." But Isa just smiled the secretive smile of a child who knows more than the adults around her. Charles knelt down, ignoring the protest of his arthritic knees, to look the girl in the eye. "And what else did Great-Grandma Lizzie tell you, Isa?" he asked gently. Isa leaned forward and whispered, She said to tell you she found the toy soldier. You hid in the fireplace and she kept it safe all these years. It's in Mom's jewelry box now. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. The little lead soldier. I never knew where it came from. It was in my grandmother's possessions when she died. I've always kept it. Charles could no longer hold back his emotions. Tears flowed freely down his face as 70 years of loneliness began to dissolve in the presence of this miraculous connection to his past. He had spent decades believing that wealth could fill the void left by family, but now he understood how wrong he had been. All the penthouses and vacation homes and investment portfolios in the world couldn't compare to this moment of recognition, of belonging. "Would you like to see it?" Claire asked softly. "We live just a few blocks from here. It's nothing fancy." "But—" Charles cut her off with a gentle shake of his head. "It sounds perfect. More perfect than you could possibly know." As they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave the park, Charles noticed Isa adding one final touch to her drawing. A small figure of a boy sitting in the window seat, watching the world outside. Their modest apartment was on the 3rd floor of a well-maintained but clearly aging building. Charles took in every detail as Claire unlocked the door, the worn welcome mat, the children's artwork taped to the walls of the entryway, the scent of home-cooked meals lingering in the air. It was small, but immaculately clean, filled with second-hand furniture that had been chosen with care rather than convenience. It reminded him, with a pang of nostalgia, of the apartment his family had, moved to after losing their house, how his mother had worked so hard to make it feel like home, despite their reduced circumstances. Isa immediately took his hand and led him to the living room, eager to show him her collection of drawings. "I have more pictures of the house," she announced proudly. "I've drawn every room." Claire excused herself to make coffee and retrieve the soldier, leaving Charles and Isa to their artistic exploration. "This is the kitchen," Isa explained, showing him a detailed rendering of a space he remembered intimately. The big cast-iron stove where his mother baked bread every Saturday. The wide farmhouse sink under the window that looked out onto the garden. "And this is the secret room." Charles froze, staring at the next drawing. It showed a small storage space under the stairs, a place where he used to hide when his parents argued about money in the years leading up to their financial ruin. He had never told anyone about this hiding spot, not even Lizzie. It had been his sanctuary, his private retreat from the tensions that had eventually torn his family apart. "How do you know about this place, Isa?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She shrugged, the gesture endearingly casual in contrast to the extraordinary nature of her knowledge. "I just know. Sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I can feel myself hiding there, listening to people talking about dollars and cents and banks. It makes me sad." Claire returned with a small wooden box in her hands, her expression a mixture of wonder and apprehension. "I found it," she said, sitting beside them on the worn sofa. She opened the box carefully and removed a tissue-wrapped object. With trembling fingers, she unwrapped it to reveal a small lead soldier, its paint chipped but still recognizable, a cavalry officer on horseback, saber raised in eternal charge. Charles reached for it, his hand shaking so badly that Claire had to steady him as she placed the toy in his palm. "My father gave this to me on my 8th birthday," he whispered. "It was the last gift I received before everything fell apart." He closed his fingers around the soldier, feeling its familiar weight and contours. The toy had traveled through time and family connections to find its way back to him, just as he had finally found his way back to family. The significance of this moment wasn't lost on him. How objects could carry memories, how connections could transcend time and space, how family bonds could remain unbroken despite decades of separation. "There's something else," Claire said hesitantly. She reached back into the box and pulled out a yellowed envelope. "My grandmother left this with instructions that it should stay with the soldier. I've never opened it. She handed it to Charles, who recognized the handwriting immediately. The distinctive way Lizzie formed her letters, a skill they had both learned at their mother's kitchen table. The envelope was addressed simply, "For Charles, if he is ever found." With a deep breath, Charles carefully opened the seal, mindful not to tear the fragile paper. Inside was a letter, written decades ago but preserved with care, and a small key that he recognized instantly, the key to the front door of their childhood home. As he unfolded the letter, Claire put her arm around Isa, both watching him with matching expressions of anticipation. "My dearest brother," he began reading aloud, his voice thick with emotion. "If you are reading this, then the connection I have felt with you throughout my life, despite our separation, has somehow brought you back to our family." The letter was 4 pages long, written in Lizzie's careful hand, documenting her life after their family's downfall, her struggles and triumphs, her marriage and children, her unwavering pride in her brother's achievements from afar. She explained how she had tried to contact him multiple times over the years, but had always lost her courage at the last moment, afraid that he had moved on from their painful past and wouldn't welcome her reappearance. Charles read every word aloud, pausing occasionally when his emotions threatened to overwhelm him. The final paragraph brought both him and Claire to tears. "I have always felt you with me, Charles, even when we were apart. There is a connection between us that transcends physical distance. Perhaps it is the bond of shared childhood, or perhaps it is something more mystical, the connection of souls who are meant to be family across time and space. I believe that someday, somehow, this letter will find its way to you, and our family will be whole again. Until then, I am always your loving sister, Elizabeth." When he finished reading, the apartment was silent, except for the soft sounds of their collective emotion. Isa, who had listened with remarkable patience for a child her age, finally spoke. "Great-Grandma Lizzie was right," she said simply. "She said our family would be whole again." Charles looked at this remarkable child, this bridge between past and present, and felt a sense of peace wash over him. For years, he had chased success as a way to prove himself, to overcome the shame of his family's financial ruin. He had built an empire, but he had built it alone. Now, in this modest apartment with these newfound relatives, he understood that his sister had built something far more valuable, a legacy of love that had survived even death. "Claire," he said finally, wiping his eyes with his handkerchief, "I would like to be part of your lives if you'll let me. Not just today, but going forward." He turned to include Isa in his gaze. "Both of your lives." Claire reached out and took his weathered hand in her younger one. "We would like that very much," she said softly. "Isa has been talking about a grandfather figure in her life for months now. I thought it was just wishful thinking because she doesn't have many older relatives." Her voice trailed off as the implications of Isa's prescience once again made themselves felt. Had the child somehow known he was coming into their lives? Had Elizabeth, through some inexplicable connection, been preparing her great-granddaughter for this reunion? Charles had lived too long and seen too much to dismiss such possibilities outright. Whatever forces had brought them together, fate, coincidence, or something more mysterious, he was profoundly grateful. "I have a proposition," he said, straightening his shoulders with newfound purpose. "I've been thinking about downsizing for years now. My house is far too big for just me, and it's never felt like home the way it should." He took a deep breath, hoping he wasn't overstepping. "Would you consider looking for a larger apartment, something with more space for Isa to grow and play? I'd like to help make that possible." Charles was careful with his phrasing, wanting to offer assistance without making Claire feel that he was trying to buy his way into their lives with his wealth. To his relief, she didn't immediately reject the idea. "That's very generous," she said thoughtfully. "We have been saving for a bigger place, but on a teacher's salary it's been slow going." She looked around their small apartment with a mixture of pride and resignation. I've done my best to make this a good home for Issa, but... Charles nodded, in understanding. You've done wonderfully. This is a lovely home because you've made it so, but every child deserves room to grow and explore. He glanced at Issa, who was adding more details to yet another drawing of his childhood home. And perhaps an art studio? The little girl looked up with such hope in her eyes that Charles felt his heart expand in his chest. This was what had been missing from his life. Not just family connections, but the opportunity to make a meaningful difference for someone else, to see joy bloom because of something he could provide. Over the next few weeks, Charles became a regular visitor at Claire and Issa's apartment. He joined them for dinner 3 times a week, bringing dessert each time, despite Claire's protestations that it wasn't necessary. They fell into an easy rhythm together, sharing stories and building bridges across the decades of family history that had been lost. Charles learned that Claire was a dedicated elementary school teacher who had raised Issa alone after her husband left when their daughter was just 2 years old. She had never sought child support, preferring to make her own way rather than maintain a connection to a man who had abandoned his family. Her resilience reminded Charles so much of Lizzie that sometimes it took his breath away. Meanwhile, Issa continued to astound him with her knowledge of the past. One evening, as they looked through old photographs Charles had brought, she pointed to an image taken on the porch of the childhood home and said, "That's where you fell and broke your arm when you were 9. Charles stared at her in amazement. He had indeed broken his arm falling from that porch, a fact not recorded in any family history. "I've been thinking," Charles said one evening as he helped Claire wash dishes after dinner. Issa was in the living room, working on a new drawing under the soft lamplight. The anniversary of Margaret's passing is next week. He hadn't spoken much about his late wife, finding the subject still painful despite the years that had passed. "I usually visit her grave alone, but I was wondering if you and Issa might accompany me this year." He kept his eyes on the plate he was drying, uncertain how Claire would respond to such a personal request. To his relief, she placed her soapy hand gently on his arm. "We would be honored, Charles," she said softly. "Family should be together on difficult days." The simple truth of her statement nearly undid him. For so long, he had faced his grief in solitude, believing it was his burden alone to bear. The prospect of having family beside him as he remembered Margaret filled him with both gratitude and a bittersweet joy. "Margaret would have loved you both," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "She always wanted children, but it wasn't meant to be for us." The day they visited Margaret's grave was unusually warm for autumn, with golden sunlight filtering through the cemetery's ancient oak trees. Charles wore his best suit out of respect, while Claire was elegant in a simple navy dress. Issa had picked wildflowers on their walk from the parking lot and held them carefully in her small hands as they approached. The marble headstone. Charles introduced them formally, speaking to the grave as if Margaret could hear him. "My dear, I've brought family to meet you today. This is Claire, my sister Elizabeth's granddaughter, and this is Issa, our great-grandniece." His voice caught on the word "our," acknowledging that in another lifetime, another reality, Margaret would have shared in this joy of rediscovered family. Issa stepped forward without prompting and placed her wildflowers gently at the base of the headstone. "Hello, Aunt Margaret," she said in her clear child's voice. "Uncle Charles misses you very much, but we're going to take good care of him now, so you don't have to worry anymore." The simple ceremony at the graveside marked a turning point in their evolving relationship. On the drive back, Charles finally found the courage to broach the subject that had been on his mind. "I've been looking at houses," he said carefully, glancing at Claire in the passenger seat. "Not just apartments, but actual houses with yards where Issa could play." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I know this might seem rushed, but at my age I've learned not to waste time when something feels right. I'd like to buy a house where We could all live together, with separate spaces for privacy, of course, but as a family. He hurried on before Claire could respond, afraid she might immediately reject the idea as too presumptuous. You would still maintain your independence. Completely, I've lived alone for too long, and life is too short to remain separate when we could support each other. He fell silent then, waiting for her reaction with a tension he hadn't felt since his early days of business negotiations. Claire was quiet, for so long that Charles began to regret his proposition. But when she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful, rather than offended. You know, my mother always told me stories about Elizabeth, about how she would say that family wasn't just about blood, but about who you choose to build your life with. She turned slightly in her seat to look at him directly. I think she would approve of us creating a new kind of family together. From the back seat, Issa's voice piped up. I already drew our new house, Uncle Charles. It has a big tree in the backyard, perfect for a swing. Charles caught Claire's eye, and they shared a smile at the child's confidence. It seemed Issa had already decided their future living arrangements were settled. Well then, Charles said, his heart lighter than it had been in years. We'd better start looking for a house that matches Issa's drawing. I've learned not to question her visions. As they drove through the autumn landscape, Charles felt a sense of rightness settle over him. After a lifetime of building wealth, he was finally building something infinitely more valuable: a family. The house they eventually found wasn't Charles's childhood home. That was long gone. But it had a similar character and warmth. It was a gracious Victorian with enough space for privacy, as well as togetherness, situated on a tree-lined street in a neighborhood with excellent schools. Charles insisted that Claire be listed as co-owner on the deed, despite her protests. This isn't charity, he explained firmly. This is family, and family takes care of each other. They moved in just before Christmas, transforming the empty rooms into a home filled with a mixture of Charles's antiques and Claire and Issa's more modest possessions. The combination worked surprisingly well, creating spaces that felt both elegant and lived in. Charles converted one of the downstairs rooms into an art studio for Issa, with natural light streaming through bay windows and built-in shelves for her growing collection of art supplies. The little girl spent hours there, creating new drawings that increasingly focused on the present and future rather than the mysterious past that had initially connected them. Christmas morning found them gathered around a towering fir tree, decorated with a mixture of Charles's heirloom ornaments and the handmade creations Issa had brought home from school. The scene was both ordinary and miraculous. 3 people, who had been strangers just months ago, now sharing traditions as if they had been family all their lives. As Issa tore into her presence with childish enthusiasm, Charles watched Claire's face, seeing in it echoes of his sister at the same age. I have something special for both of you, he said when the main gift exchange was complete. From his pocket, he withdrew 2 small boxes wrapped in silver paper. Claire opened hers first, gasping softly at the antique locket inside. It was my mother's, Charles explained, and before that, her mother's. It should have gone to Lizzie, but now it's found its way to you. Inside the locket was a tiny photograph of Elizabeth as a young woman, smiling at the camera with the same bright expression Issa often wore. Claire's eyes filled with tears as she fastened it around her neck. Issa's box contained a small silver charm bracelet, with just 2 charms to start, a miniature house and a paintbrush. Every great artist needs something to commemorate their work, Charles told her as he helped fasten it around her wrist. We'll add more charms as you grow. Issa examined the bracelet with solemn appreciation before throwing her arms around his neck in a fierce hug. Thank you, Uncle Charles. I knew you would come into our lives and make everything better. Great-Grandma Lizzie promised. Over the child's head, Charles met Claire's gaze, sharing a moment of wonder at Issa's continuing connection to a woman she had never met in the conventional sense. There were mysteries in this world that defied explanation, Charles had come to accept. Sometimes the most one could do was to be grateful for the inexplicable blessings they brought. And as he sat there on Christmas morning, surrounded by the family he had found through the most unlikely of circumstances, Charles Westbrook, once defined solely by his wealth, understood at last the true meaning of being rich. That spring, Charles legally adopted Claire, making official what they had already come to feel, that they were father and daughter in every way that mattered. When the lawyer asked if he was sure, given that Claire was in her 30s and hardly in need of legal guardianship, Charles had simply smiled and said, "Some things should be made official, even if they're just formalities. This family has missed too many milestones together already." For Claire, who had lost her own father at a young age, the adoption held deep emotional significance. "Now Issa has a grandfather on paper, as well as in her heart," she said, at the small celebration they held afterward. Charles, who had once measured his success in buildings acquired and deals closed, now found himself assessing his life by different metrics, by Issa's laughter as she played in the garden he had planted for her, by the quiet evenings spent in conversation with Claire, by the sense of purpose he felt each morning when he woke in a house filled with the sounds of family. The mystery of Issa's knowledge about the childhood home remained unexplained, a private wonder that the three of them had come to accept as part of what made their family special. Charles had consulted experts discreetly, child psychologists, researchers of paranormal phenomena, but no one could offer a definitive explanation for how a child could possess such detailed memories of a place and time she couldn't possibly have experienced. Perhaps some connections transcend what we understand about time and space, one researcher had suggested. Or perhaps the bond between family members creates channels through which information can flow in ways we don't yet comprehend. Charles, I didn't need scientific validation to appreciate the miracle that had brought them together. Whatever forces had guided Issa's pencil that day in the park, he was eternally grateful for them. The drawing that had started it all now hung, professionally framed, in their living room, a constant reminder of how a single moment of recognition can change the course of multiple lives. As the seasons changed, and their first year as a family approached, Charles found himself reflecting on the incredible journey that had led them to each other. He had spent decades building an empire, constructing skyscrapers and developing properties across the country, yet nothing he had ever built compared to the joy of helping Issa with her homework, or sharing a quiet cup of tea with Claire after the little girl had gone to bed. His former associates were baffled by his sudden step back from business, his delegation of responsibilities to trusted lieutenants so he could focus on family life. "You've become a different man, Charles," his oldest friend remarked during a rare business lunch. Charles had simply smiled and replied, "Not different, just finally complete." And it was true. The ambition that had driven him for so long hadn't disappeared. It had simply found a new focus in ensuring that Claire and Issa would always have everything they needed, not just materially, but emotionally as well. One evening, as Charles helped Issa prepare for her first ever art show at school, he found himself thinking about legacy in a way he never had before. "You know," he said, as they carefully mounted her drawings on display boards, "I used to think that success meant having your name on buildings or in the business pages of newspapers." Issa looked up at him curiously, her hazel eyes, so like his sister's, focused intently on his face. "But now I understand that the only legacy that truly matters is the one we build in the hearts of the people we love." He gestured to her artwork spread across the table, no longer just drawings of his childhood home, but vibrant depictions of their current life together. Claire gardening, Charles reading in his favorite chair, the three of them sharing meals and laughter. "This is the real treasure, Issa. These moments we create together." The child nodded with a wisdom beyond her years. "That's why Great-Grandma Lizzie helped us find you, Uncle Charles. She knew you needed to remember what really matters.